We need to restructure your assets before you leave. My father had told me, pretending it was for my own good. Now, 3 days before my flight to Denver, I sat across from him in a Chicago conference room. Their lawyer, Mark Foster, tapped his manicured fingers against the keyboard, entering the routing numbers for my estate into the firm's private banking terminal. My father leaned forward in his leather chair. He was already spending wealth that was never his. Mark hit the return key. The screen loaded. Mark blinked hard, typed the sequence again, and cleared his throat. The balance is $1,500. He said. My father stopped breathing. The arrogant country club smirk vanished from his face, instantly replaced by a sickly, bloodless gray. His jaw locked tight enough to crack a tooth. He stared at the monitor, his hands trembling against the mahogany table, as the reality of a stolen $5 million prize evaporated into thin air. That look of total devastation was the finish line. The starting gun had fired 3 weeks earlier, right in the middle of a disaster in my living room. I am Sarah Mitchell. I am 32 years old. And for the last 10 years, I have worked as an executive assistant for a major logistics firm. My entire career is built on managing chaotic people, predicting their failures, and organizing airtight solutions before the sky falls. I excel at my job. But in the Bennett family, my career was nothing more than a punchline. I was the invisible daughter. I was the glorified secretary who fixed the Wi-Fi, booked the anniversary dinners, and managed the holiday logistics, all while they poured every ounce of their love and resources into my older brother, Brandon. Brandon was their golden child. He called himself a visionary entrepreneur, which was just a polite way of saying he spent our parents' money on luxury lofts and leased sports cars while pitching vaporware to gullible investors. At every Thanksgiving, my mother, Olivia, would parade Brandon around the room, boasting about his imaginary corporate conquests. Then she would look at me, sigh, and ask if I was still fetching coffee for a living. They mocked my steady paycheck, completely blind to the irony that my organizational skills were the only thing keeping their daily lives functioning. They broke my spirit for years, diminishing my worth until I felt like a ghost in my own family. But they had no idea that the exact administrative brilliance they laughed at was about to become the weapon that would permanently dismantle their empire. The illusion shattered on a Tuesday. Brandon's house of cards finally collapsed. He was sued for $4,800,000 for extreme investor fraud. He had falsified metrics, embezzled seed money, and lied to federal regulators. The panic in my parents' Chicago estate was suffocating. If Brandon went down, the Bennett family name went down with him. The country club memberships would be revoked. The board seats would vanish. The social annihilation would be absolute. They needed liquid cash, and their own assets were tied up in heavily mortgaged real estate. That is when they turned their eyes to me. Or rather, they turned their eyes to the $5 million trust fund my grandmother had left exclusively in my name. She bypassed my father completely, knowing exactly how reckless he was with money. She left it to me because I was the only responsible adult in the bloodline. My parents demanded I hand over the entire trust to bail Brandon out. They phrased it as a family duty. I stared at my mother, watching her twist her expensive rings, and gave her my answer. Absolutely not. The retaliation was swift and vicious. The gaslighting texts flooded my phone. My mother called me a selfish traitor. My father threatened to cut me off, oblivious to the fact that I had been entirely financially independent since I was 18. They tried to break me down with guilt, treating me like a defective emergency fund that was refusing to dispense cash. But I held my ground. I focused on packing my boxes for my upcoming career transfer to Denver, assuming their toxic tantrums would eventually burn out. I severely underestimated their greed. The truth did not come from a dramatic confession. It came from a mundane administrative chore. My phone buzzed with an annoying alert notifying me that the family iCloud storage plan was completely full. Because I was still the designated tech support for the family, I logged into the admin dashboard to clear out the junk files. While scrolling through my father's synced documents, a newly saved file caught my eye. The title read Relocation Proxy Draft. My chest tightened. I clicked the file. It was a dense, highly aggressive, irrevocable power of attorney. I checked the sync sent folder and found the email thread between my father and Mark Foster, his corrupt corporate lawyer. The conspiracy was laid out in plain, arrogant text. They knew I was buried under international tax forms and relocation bureaucracy for my move to Denver. Their plan was to slip this forged power of attorney into a stack of routine housing proxies. They were going to rush me through a signing session, banking on my exhaustion. The second my plane took off for Colorado, my father was going to march into the bank, present the proxy, and drain every single penny of my $5 million trust to pay off Brandon's criminal debts. They were going to leave me completely destitute, stranded in a new city with nothing, just to protect Brandon's country club reputation. My blood turned to ice. They were not just toxic parents anymore. They were active predators. They viewed my survival as entirely expendable. A normal person might have called the police or confronted them in a screaming rage, but my logistics training kicked in. Screaming alerts the enemy. You never tell a hostile actor that you have discovered their breach. You simply change the locks and let them walk blindly into their own trap. I skipped the bureaucratic red tape. You cannot silently move $5 million without triggering massive banking alerts. So I cashed in the biggest professional favor of my life. I called my CEO's elite wealth manager, a man whose impossible schedule I controlled every single day. Recognizing the legal emergency, he fast-tracked a massive protective maneuver. Within 48 hours, he executed a flawless transfer, moving the entire $5 million into a secure, untouchable escrow holding account under his firm's umbrella. The capital was legally shielded behind a wall of corporate armor while the formal paperwork for an impenetrable South Dakota trust was processed in the background. I intentionally left exactly $1,500 in my primary account. It was a pathetic, insulting sum. Just enough to keep the account active and avoid triggering an automated closure alert that would have warned my father. The decoy was set. Next, I engineered the social execution. I drafted a meticulously organized email. I attached the public court docket of Brandon's fraud lawsuit, the emergency asset freeze, and crystal clear screenshots of the iCloud emails proving my father and Mark Foster were conspiring to commit felony trust fraud. I set the email on a strict time delay. The recipients included the entire Chicago Country Club board of directors, my father's corporate partners, and the furious investors Brandon had defrauded. With the guillotine suspended in the air, I pulled out my phone and typed a sweet, obedient text message to my father. I told him I was so overwhelmed with packing that I would gladly stop by Mark's office on Tuesday to sign all the relocation papers. He replied with a heart emoji. It was the most sickening thing I had ever seen. Which brings us back to the mahogany conference room. The silence following Mark Foster's announcement was heavy enough to crush bone. The screen glowed with a $1,500 balance. Daniel's arrogant posture collapsed entirely. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive collar. Check the routing numbers, he demanded, his voice cracking into a desperate rasp. You missed a zero. Check the holding accounts. Find the money. Mark cleared the terminal and ran the query a second time. The result remained identical. Puree. Visceral panic flooded the room. Brandon, who had been lounging on the sofa waiting for his multi-million-dollar bailout, suddenly sat up, his face draining of color as the reality of his impending bankruptcy crashed over him. He tried to puff out his chest and step toward me, but he never made it. Mark Foster understood exactly what was happening. The seasoned lawyer recognized that he was staring down the barrel of federal prison time and immediate disbarment. Mark literally shoved past Brandon, snatched his leather briefcase off the table, and fled out the heavy double doors without saying a single word. He abandoned his clients to save his own skin. Olivia clutched her chest. The sheer terror of losing her elite social standing overwhelmed her nervous system. She gasped for air, her eyes rolling back, and she collapsed in a dead faint onto the thick carpet. She was hyperventilating, completely broken by the evaporation of her vanity. Daniel did not call for a doctor. He did not even look down, demonstrating the absolute peak of his narcissism. My father actually stepped directly over his unconscious wife just to get closer to me. You reverse that wire right now, he has said, gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. I will sue you. I will tie you up in court until you are destitute. You owe this family. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a manila folder. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I slid the printed iCloud emails and the draft of the forged power of attorney across the polished wood. Daniel looked down at his own criminal conspiracy laid bare in black and white ink. His mouth opened, but all the sound died in his throat. Grandma knew exactly who you were. I said, staring directly into his terrified eyes, and now, so do I. I turned my back on the wreckage and walked out of the law firm. I left them suffocating in the exact cage they had built for me. But a wounded narcissist is the most dangerous creature on earth. They do not accept defeat gracefully. They lash out with whatever leverage they have left. I went back to my apartment to finish zipping my final suitcase for the airport. An hour later, a heavy, aggressive pounding shook my front door. I opened it to find Daniel standing in the hallway, flanked by 2 Chicago police officers. His face was twisted in a mask of spiteful rage, relying entirely on his wealthy country club privilege. He had called in a wellness check. He pointed a shaking finger at me and spun a frantic, malicious lie to the officers. He claimed I was having a severe psychotic break, that I was acting erratically, and that I had committed elder financial abuse by stealing his life savings. He demanded they detain me and freeze my assets, hoping the police intimidation would force me to miss my flight and surrender the money. The officers stepped forward, their hands resting cautiously near their belts. They looked at the packed boxes and then at me, their expressions hardened by my father's accusations. I did not flinch. I did not argue with my father. I simply walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up a thick legal binder, and handed it to the lead officer. I calmly explained that they were looking at certified, notarized South Dakota trust documents proving the $5 million was legally inherited solely by me, and that my father had zero legal claim to a single dime. Then I picked up my phone. I tapped the screen and played a voicemail on speakerphone. It was a frantic, screaming message my father had left me 20 minutes prior while rushing over in his car. His voice echoed through the hallway, explicitly threatening to ruin my life, demanding the money for Brandon's lawsuit, and promising to use the cops to teach me a lesson. The heavy silence in the hallway shifted completely. The officers looked from my phone to the pristine legal documents, and finally to my father, They realized instantly that they were being weaponized as personal muscle for a fraudulent extortion attempt. The lead officer handed my binder back. He turned to my father, grabbed him by the shoulder, and spun him around. Daniel tried to sputter an excuse, but the officer cut him off, informing him that filing a false police report to harass a citizen was a crime. They slapped the handcuffs on him right there on my doorstep. I stood in the doorway and watched them march my father down the hall in front of all my neighbors. As the elevator doors closed on his red, humiliated face, my phone chimed in my pocket. It was the confirmation notification. The automated country club guillotine email had just successfully sent. The Bennett empire was officially reduced to ashes. I took my bags, got into my Uber, and flew to Denver. I am sitting on my new balcony now, looking out over the mountains, and the air here is incredibly clear. When you survive a betrayal this profound, you do not just walk away with your life. You walk away with a completely new understanding of human nature. Toxic parents do not actually love their golden child. They love the reflection of their own ego. Brandon was never a son to them. He was a shiny trophy they used to validate their own worth. And I was never a daughter. I was the emergency fund they planned to liquidate the moment their trophy tarnished. I learned 3 brutal rules through this survival process. Rule number 1, the absolute currency of a toxic family is guilt. If they cannot control you with their money, they will desperately try to control you with obligation. They will weaponize the word family to make you tolerate abuse you would never accept from a stranger. Rule number 2, you must fight a narcissist with administration, not emotion. Screaming at them gives them the exact power and attention they crave. But paperwork, firm boundaries, and silent action strip their power away entirely. You do not have to argue with a thief, you just have to move the safe. And rule number 3, blood is biology, but loyalty is family. Sharing a last name does not give anyone the right to destroy your future. There are absolutely no loose ends left in Chicago. Brandon's investors tore him apart in civil court. He filed for complete personal bankruptcy and is currently working a minimum wage retail job. Entirely stripped of his arrogant bravado, Daniel was immediately expelled from the country club. The board of directors forced him to resign in disgrace once the fraud emails circulated, without my trust fund to save them. My parents had to sell their estate at a massive loss just to cover their soaring legal fees. And Mark Foster is currently the subject of a massive federal investigation for conspiracy to commit financial fraud. His license is suspended, and his career is over. I am completely free. I sleep through the night. My career in Denver is thriving. And the people I surround myself with now actually respect my mind, my boundaries, and my worth. If you are sitting in a house right now where your value is strictly measured by what you can provide for people who fundamentally do not respect you, you have to ask yourself what you are waiting for. You have the power to change the locks. Drop your story in the comments below. Hit subscribe to join this community of survivors. And always remember, the greatest revenge is never a screaming match. It is a quiet, permanent exit. We know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. Why did she wait so long? Why did she endure years of being treated like a glorified servant before finally snapping? It is incredibly easy to look at a situation from the outside and demand immediate retaliation. But when you are inside the toxic family dynamic, the reality is far more complicated. What Sarah experienced was the slot machine effect, formerly known in psychology as intermittent reinforcement. Toxic families do not treat the scapegoat terribly 100% of the time. If they did, the victim would just leave. Instead, they drop tiny, unpredictable crumbs of hope, a rare compliment on her organizational skills, an invitation to a holiday dinner, a fleeting moment where she felt like she might finally belong. That intermittent reward creates a powerful psychological addiction. She was not stupid. She was conditioned to keep pulling the lever, hoping that this time her hard work would finally hit the jackpot of her parents' genuine love. It takes a massive, undeniable shock, like discovering a forged power of attorney, to finally break that trance. From a street smart financial perspective, Sarah executed an absolute masterclass in self-defense. Let us break down her specific smart moves. First, she employed the audit strategy. When abusers demand money, they rely on chaos, urgency, and emotional pressure to force you into a blind signature. Sarah stopped the momentum by refusing to act on their timeline. She reviewed the synced emails. She read the actual documents. Scammers absolutely hate details. The moment you slow down and inspect the paperwork, their entire strategy crumbles. Second, she executed the buyout. Leaving the $1,500 in the checking account was brilliant. It was not just an insult, it was a tactical decoy. By keeping the account active, she prevented the automated closure alerts from warning her father. She invested a tiny fraction of her wealth to purchase the crucial time she needed to secure the other $5 million. Sometimes, leaving a small piece of cheese on the trap is the only way to catch the rat. Finally, she understood the power of building the case. She did not argue with the police on her doorstep. She did not yell at her father. She handed the officers legally binding trust documents and played a recorded voicemail. She separated her emotions from the evidence. When you are dealing with narcissists, your feelings do not matter to them, and they do not matter to the law. Only documentation matters. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name with them. Trust is earned. It is never owed. Your future belongs to you, not to the people who failed to protect you in the past. If Sarah's tactical escape gave you the blueprint you need, share your own survival strategies in the comments below. Subscribe for more real-world defense tactics. And remember to always protect your peace. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are sitting there yelling. Why did she wait 10 years? Why did she endure a decade of being treated like a glorified servant before finally packing her bags and fighting back? It is so easy to look at a situation from the outside and demand immediate retaliation. But when you are inside a toxic family dynamic, the reality is far more complicated. What our protagonist experienced is called the slot machine effect, formerly known in psychology as intermittent reinforcement. Toxic families do not treat the scapegoat terribly 100% of the time. If they did, the victim would simply leave. Instead, they drop tiny, unpredictable crumbs of hope, a rare compliment on her organizational skills, an invitation to a holiday dinner, a fleeting moment where she felt like she might finally belong. That intermittent reward creates a powerful psychological addiction. She was not stupid, and she was not weak. She was conditioned to keep pulling the lever, desperately hoping that this time her hard work would finally hit the jackpot of her parents' genuine love. It takes a massive, undeniable shock, like discovering a forged power of attorney, to finally break that trance. Now, let us pivot from the psychology to the survival tactics. From a street smart financial perspective, she executed an absolute masterclass in self-defense. Let us break down her specific smart moves. First, she employed what we call the audit strategy. When abusers demand your money, they rely on chaos, urgency, and emotional pressure to force you into a blind signature. She stopped the momentum by refusing to act on their timeline. She logged in, reviewed the synced files, and read the actual documents. Remember this, scammers absolutely hate details. The moment you slow down and inspect the paperwork, their entire strategy crumbles. Second, she executed the buyout. Leaving that $1,500 in the checking account was brilliant. It was not just an insult, it was a tactical decoy. By keeping the account active, she prevented the automated closure alerts from warning her father. She essentially invested a tiny fraction of her wealth to purchase the crucial time she needed to legally secure her $5 million. Sometimes leaving a small piece of cheese on the trap is the only way to catch the rat. Finally, she understood the immense power of building the case. When the police arrived at her door, she did not argue with them. She did not yell at her father. She handed the officers legally binding trust documents and played a recorded voicemail. She separated her emotions from the evidence. When you are dealing with narcissists, your feelings do not matter to them. And they do not matter to the law. Only documentation matters. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you. Even if you share a last name with them, trust is earned. It is never, ever owed. Your future belongs to you, not to the people who failed to protect you in the past. If this tactical escape gave you the blueprint you need, share your own survival strategies in the comments below. Hit subscribe for more real-world defense tactics. And remember to always protect your peace.